Alex Sanchez. I am so excited to be here talking to you about your new project, which is like combining all of my loves with, novels, teen, LGBTQ, and comic books.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you. Thank you so much.
So, Alex, maybe for some of our folks who are listening, viewing, and then reading this, tell us, can you share a little bit about your journey first into fiction and why gay teen fiction, and and then we can talk about how that you made that move into kind of comics books.
Sure. Well, I think what happened with me was like, for me, like for a lot of young people, it's like being a teenager can be a tough time. And for me, it was very confusing and scary. In my case, in large part because of my sexuality, not being sure, who I was, and being attracted to, guys as well as girls, and sorting all that out. And so being a teenager was a tough time for me. And I think what happens is those feelings get bottled up inside. And then later on in life, they started coming out through my writing. And it was scary at first to, actually put all that stuff on the page and say, yep, that's me. That's what's been going on inside me. And then scarier still to share it with other people and make myself vulnerable to that sort of rejection. But all along the way, it was also such an empowering process to, be able to say, yes, this is who I am, and to get the positive feedback from it. And so it was with the help of a couple of creative friends. One was a songwriter, the other was a paper mache artist, and we encouraged each other with our creative projects. And so with them, I committed to write my first novel. Like a lot of writers, I had my big writer's block was finishing things, that I would start things, but then it was hard to finish them. And looking back, I think what happens is, writing fiction is all about emotional honesty and putting our, innermost thoughts and feelings on the page. And that can be a very scary process. And at the same time, that's how we connect, by connecting with others, what the stories that they're telling in terms of the more true and honest and vulnerable they can be in their writing. So it was through my friends' encouragement that I was able to do that, and then finish that first novel, which became Rainbow Boys.
Absolutely. And it seemed like you were right at the edge there when teen fiction kind of suddenly exploded and has become a real creative space, a space for industry to be paying attention.
Yeah, a lot of that is thanks to Harry Potter, who really blew open the young adult market to not just more young people, but then also to so many adults who read young adult fiction, because they're telling such powerful real life issues. And so for me, Rainbow Boys came out in 2001, and at the time, people saw it as very groundbreaking, because yes, there had been, an isolated case or several of, LGBT characters appearing in fiction. But usually there was, they were loners, they were isolated, and it's oftentimes they had to either commit suicide or die tragically. It was sort of this unspoken rule in publishing. And when I wrote Rainbow Boys, I was very clear, no one was going to die in the novel. And what the publisher was very excited about was showing how it's about a love triangle between three high school senior boys, how they were connecting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the result of that has been this tremendous sort of community building process, part that these books have played, not just as books that young people read, but then how empowering it is for them to see images of themselves in print.
Absolutely. So empowering. These teen novels, actually, the kind of complexity of emotions and ethics and actions that we just, a lot of people didn't believe could happen in these kinds of fictional spaces. in a way, it's sort of the same with comics, right? And I was thinking as you were talking there that comics has also become, comic books have traditionally also been this space of bringing together readers, right? So it's not just reading in
Right.
isolation. And I know your books are also community building.
Right.
But
Exactly.
tell us, like, okay, this is crazy. So I mean, even your biographical origin story, you know, your mixed, yeah, ethnicities. You're, you know, born in Mexico, then where you lived in the Southwest, and then moving, but also, gosh, from teen fiction to what I think is one of the most exciting things that has happened in DC in a long time, which is this incredible series of teen graphic novels that's rebooting a lot of, you know, the superhero characters that were very kind of vanilla before.
Right. So yeah, what's happening is DC, they launched this series of novels aimed at primarily, but not exclusively, at middle grade and young adult readers. What they wanted to do is reach a broader audience than those who typically read comic books. And so what they want these books to do is focus on uh, real life teen issues that young people are going through as they grow. And so they wanted one that specifically addressed issues about sexuality and sexual orientation. And so they asked around who might be a good writer to do that. And so they came across me in my books. And so they reached out to me and told me that they had this character, Aqualad, who in previous versions had identified as gay, and would I like to, you know, write a new version of him. And it was very exciting for me because in a novel, I think what these graphic novels are able to do that oftentimes, you know, comic books will be limited to 20 to 30 pages. In a graphic novel, you have 150 to 200 pages that you can go much more in depth into the emotional experience of the characters. So when you have a character who is not only identified as gay, but I was able to then really delve into, well, what would his story be? And part of what it was exciting in my case was to look at, you know, how for so many queer people, LGBTQ people, superheroes, you know, traditionally have been sort of this metaphor of what it's like to grow up queer, where we'll have, you know, either these secret identities, we'll have to live these double lives because we're dealing with this real life supervillain that's homophobia and transphobia. So part of what was exciting for me to do in this graphic novel is explore the lead character, Jake Hyde, dealing not only with his sexuality and, you know, coming to terms with that, at the same time that then he's discovering his superpowers.
Yeah, really amazing, really amazing. Was there a moment when you sort of hesitated to take the project, or was it kind of green lights and balloon parties all the way when you were asked if you would take it on?
No, it was both exciting and scary because this is my first graphic novel. And even though, you know, when I was a boy, I loved to draw and I was just drawing constantly and read, you know, my share of comic books, uh, to actually write a graphic novel, it's like I knew nothing about that. And I was, you know, DC knew that I hadn't. And so, and I said, you understand I've never done this. And they were like, that's okay. You know how to tell a story. And what we really want you to focus on is the emotional core of the story. So don't worry about researching too much about the character and finding out, you know, what's been said about him, but rather really make this story your own. So they gave me that tremendous freedom to do that, to really write the story that I wanted to tell. And at the same time, there were some things, some caveats, like they said, now it needs to be set in the DC universe. So figure out some way to bring that story into the DC universe. So not to give too much away, but very early in the book, when when Jake and his best friend Maria are walking through the desert, and they see something swooshing across the sky, and it's like, what is that? And it's like, it's Superman. And so if, you know, some readers, they don't realize that this is they're not familiar with Aqualad, they don't realize that this is, you know, one of the things this is a superhero origin story. So it helps to ground them, and they told me, you know, they get sort of a chuckle out of that, of all of a sudden they realize, wow, this is a superhero story. We were just following these characters as a regular story. So that was
Yeah.
my initial trepidation about taking on the project. But then DC, they gave the other, you know, authors of the other books and me, they've given us all this training that's been very helpful. And it's been just so much fun learning how to write a graphic novel.
Yeah, amazing. And I love that the Superman moment, because it, in a really gentle way, it allows us to reframe the story world that you're building around the fact that superheroes coexist with us.
Exactly.
And that's it. And that's normal, and it's okay. Um, so you write in the sort of forward, when I was a boy, you mentioned, you know, Casper the Friendly Ghost, the Little Witch, good, etc. The Little Devil, and talk about monsters, really. And I thought that was a really powerful way to frame this, because, as you mentioned, so often living two lives, and also when, you know, we're suspected of, you know, being deviant, we're called monsters and so on. Maybe could you just mention a little bit about this sort of idea of the monster and Aqualad, and how they fit for you?
Sure. So, you know, as you mentioned, you know, I'm an immigrant. I'm originally from Mexico. We moved to Texas when I was 5 years old. And of course, prejudice still exists, but even more so back then, just a lot of prejudice against Mexican people. And I couldn't understand it. It's like, you know, why are they picking on me for that? You know, I'm a kid just like they're a kid. And so that feeling of, you know, unjustly being considered, you know, a sort of monster just because of who I was. And then as I got older and realizing that, you know, I was romantically attracted to boys as well as girls, but again, it's like, you know, queer people or queer kids, it's like, you know, again, treated like monsters, like there's something wrong with us, like we're horrible. And so in these comic characters, whether it was, you know, Casper the Friendly Ghost or the Wendy the Good Little Witch, where it's like they knew they were good, but then other people were scared of them just because of who they were. And so for Jake and his journey in You Brought Me the Ocean, where he's struggling with, you know, dealing with those people who would consider him, you know, monstrous for you know, being gay, or for having, you know, these strange markings on his body that you know, he later realizes are part of his superpowers. And so that sense of that, you know, anyone who's different is picked on and bullied and harassed just because they're different.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, the kind of coming into our power, right? I love that. So as we move into this anatomy of a panel kind of moment, where we're going to look at a couple of pages, and you can kind of walk us through your process. Um, Julie Moreau, wow, what a great person to collaborate with, right? A great artist, and someone who obviously gets the vision from her own experience as a creator and her own life. Um, yeah, what I know, we're gonna go to Julie in just a second. As we approach that, how does writing a comic script differ from writing a novel? You mentioned DC's training, but really, yeah, tell us, maybe walk us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, so to start out, I didn't realize that comics are written in script form, very similar to a movie scene, movie script, except, you know, breaking it down into panels. And I think what I would highlight here is that there's several key differences from, you know, writing a standard sort of prose novels. Um, and one of them is that the way it's being written, you have control over how it's going to be seen on the page. And so you can pace it, you know, according to how many panels and, you know, where you are on the page. And and then also what's very important is, you know, what they call the page turn. You know, what's going to be in that bottom right panel, you know, on both pages, but especially on the right side page, that's going to keep the reader turning the pages. So as I'm writing the script, and always, you know, for that bottom right panel, what's the hook? What's going to hook? That then is going to take the reader into the, you know, next page. So that was one key difference. Another one is that, you know, as I was writing this, You Brought Me the Ocean, I was reading so many comic books and graphic novels just to learn more about it because I had never done one before. And one of the things that struck me is the ones that I enjoyed oftentimes the most were those in which the panels were dynamic, where it wasn't just talking heads, you know, two people or three people just talking with each other, where your eyes just sort of takes for granted the heads, and instead your eye goes straight to the dialogue or to the captions, and that's really what's, you know, carrying you through the story, as opposed to panels in which the characters are doing something. And what that then your eye is forced not only to read the text, but then also, oh, what are they doing here? You know, what are their actions, their body language? What are their expressions? And so what I would do then was for each panel to figure out, okay, how can this be more dynamic in terms of the characters? So whether it was simply, you know, pouring a glass of orange juice or pointing up to the sky or whatever it would be, where the characters are doing something that then causes the eye to pause. And then that makes the reading of the novel much more exciting. And so one of the things I realized is that, you know, when we're reading a comic book or a graphic novel, ideally we're reading it on two levels, both on the text, you know, the dialogue and the captions, and then also the pictures. And that's the power of it. Otherwise, you know, may as well just be writing straight prose. So that was exciting for me. And then the whole collaborative aspect of it, I think I touched on that before. You know, to see, you know, usually when I write a novel, it's like I have a vague idea of what the character is going to look like, but then to actually see the artist actually bring the characters to life. And it's sort of this process of, at first it's like, huh, well, you know, that's not exactly what I imagined, but yeah, I really like that, especially with Jules' artwork, where it's just so gorgeous, regardless of the characters. It's like, you know, they really captured. And so it's so exhilarating then as a writer to see, you know, the characters that I created, you know, come to life through the artist's creation. So all
Right.
these
And
different aspects that were just so much fun.
yeah, and I know also from the experience of working with an artist and me writing the script that it really can make or break, you know, depending on your collaborator. So, you know, if it doesn't work with your collaborator, it can really sink the project, right? It's extraordinary, the energy that comes with co-creating, as you just mentioned. And then it kind of fuels us again, right?
Yeah.
So was this something that you were able to, I know there's a lot of control between the writer and the artist in sort of the industry. Were you able to go back and forth with Julie, or how did that work?
Yeah, so Julie, you know, people know her best from, you know, Blue is the Warmest Color, this wonderful, just very emotional story. And it was very moving for me reading it. So when DC, they're the ones who, you know, commissioned her, it was just very exciting. It was actually a little intimidating for me to think, you know, I'm going to be working with this, you know, world famous illustrator. And so the way it worked, the other difference from, you know, writing a traditional prose novel was that working with wonderful editor Sarah Miller, we worked off of the synopsis that I had originally written, and then with Sarah, the editor, then breaking it down into chunks. So the way we worked it, we wrote the first chunk, first 25%, which in the published book is chapter 1. And so we fleshed that out, as a script, and then sent that to Julie. And then Julie started working on the illustrations for that. Initially with some sketches, which is really wonderful. In the published book, DC put her their sketches at the end of the book. Julie's sketches at the end of the book, so you can see what they did there, their process. And then they went to work, and I just have so much admiration for Julie because they were cranking out 5 pages a week. And the panel, the pages will be 4 to 6 panels on average. So for them to be cranking out 30 panels a week was just like, I don't know how they did it, but it just does so much to Julie's talent. And what I think is so captivating about her illustrations is just how much emotion they're able to capture in the characters.
Absolutely extraordinary, really extraordinary. It's the kind of, it's DC becoming vitally alive once again because of the bringing together of you and Julie, really. Why, Alex, why set it in the Southwest, the story?
So that has to do with the whole Aqualad previous versions and the Aqualad story. So it's not going to be any surprise to DC readers to know that Aqualad is Black Manta's son. That's not giving much away if you're familiar with that universe. If you're not familiar with that universe, you don't know who Black Manta is. But in any case, so in a previous version, Jackson Hyde is living in New Mexico, be as far away from the water, from the ocean, from Black Manta as possible. And so that's how it ended up being set in New Mexico. In that previous version, it's actually set in Silver City, New Mexico. And having, traveled through there, I knew that there's this other town there in New Mexico, this cute little town called Truth or Consequences. And when I thought about where to set the story, I liked the idea of getting Jake as far away from the ocean as possible. But I knew of this little town, Truth or Consequences, and that just resonated for me in terms of the story and the themes of truth and honesty and being truthful and true to who we are. So that's how I ended up setting it there.
And also, of course, architecturally, right? The way Julie kind of brings it to life, but also really a way to intensify, I would say, the ethnoracial kind of demographic of this space, right? To really make it rich and textured.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful what Julie did in terms of, the 2 color palettes. There's the more muted earth tones, the tans and browns and oranges and yellows, and then the watercolors, the blues and turquoise and green. And, as you go through the novel, the way Julie did this is then the colors become more vibrant as you're going through the story. So just as, as a writer, as I use all my writer tools to be, building the conflict and escalating the complications, that Julie did the same thing in terms of her artist, in terms of their artist tools, and making it so much more vivid as they went along.
Absolutely. In an interview we did together a few years back for my book on young adult, Latinx young adult writers, you mentioned, growing up, figuring out that, at 13 years old, that the sort of word gay had all these homophobic attachments, but you were also dealing with being a Latino kid, and then hiding, right? I learned to hide my Mexican heritage as a teen. I began to hide my sexuality. And this spins us back to that beginning of the conversation where you were talking about masks and double identities. Um, with Jake, this must have felt like a really powerful springboard for you in the making of his character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, again, I think that's you know, playing with that metaphor was just so exciting that you know, in other comics that's sort of just been implied, but then to actually hear say, you know, let's talk about this full on and really show that metaphor. So where, you know, Kenny, the boy that Jake has a crush on, where he challenges him on that, and we're able to see, you know, and the way that the different characters, you know, may or may not be accepting of, you know, his queerness but not his superpowers, or they're accepting of his superpowers but not his queerness, just to have fun with all that, so
Mm.
that again the story can, you know, play on those different levels of both, you know, this is fun, and at the same time, no, this is serious. This is, you know, what some people, you know, whether they're queer people or because of their ethnicity or race or whatever, that they have to deal with.
Yeah. I noticed too that the parents in your story world are very gentle with the teenagers for the most part. And I thought that was wonderfully refreshing, because very often the tension in the coming out stories is between the teen and a parent. And yours was wonderfully complex, like you were saying. You know, the mom was more worried about the superpowers coming out, et cetera, right?
Right, and that was the fun of it, you know, to have parents, you know, any character really, any character that I create, you know, whether they are a, you know, a bully, or whether they are, you know, a hero or villain, whatever, it's like, how can the reader connect with them? So even for the bully in this story that isn't very likable, the the working with the editor, you know, where we were very focused on yeah, but what are his real human feelings? What are his, you know, jealousies? What are his motivations?
Mm.
So that the reader can at least have some connection with them, not to make them more sympathetic, but to make them, you know, more so that the reader can understand them. And then what that causes in the reader is the cognitive dissonance of, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to like this character, but I understand them.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
that's part of the fun. And certainly with parents as well, you know, not to have it be, you know, so cut and dry of, you know, this parent is good, this parent is bad, but again, to be understanding their complex motivations, because that's true of any of us as human beings. You know, none of us is, you know, 100% good or 100% bad. We all have this mix of good and bad in us. So how to have that also be true for the parents in this case.
Yeah, I love that. I also love that, you know, very kind of in a very naturalized way, Jake and Kenny are gay and ethno-racially identified. I just love the way that it just is. It's just a kind of matter of life.
Yeah, and that was part of the fun of, you know, a graphic novel, that I don't have to be commenting on their race and ethnicity, because you can see it. You can see it on the page. And so it was something that, you know, I'd never thought about. Again, never having written a graphic novel, but I think is so exciting. And, you know, if I write another one, I would love to continue to play with that. And I hope that that will strike other writers, you know, as we all try to include more diversity and more diverse images in our work, to see how, oh yeah, I can do this.
Absolutely. So we talked about kind of the masks, and very often you and I both know with comic book superheroes, Spider-Man, Batman, all of the A-listers, Cap America, they all wear masks. And for Jake, the challenge is really to kind of take his mask off. Am I reading this right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, that points to, uh, where that combination of superheroes and real life situations where young people, as I said, oftentimes we're facing this real supervillain in our lives of, transphobia and homophobia, where we do have to wear a mask when we're growing up. And that mask is, straightness. You know, no one knows who I really am. No one knows I'm gay, or whatever. And to be able to, for him to express himself. And, in all of my work, I think all of my agent tells me, all of my stories are about being true to who you are. I'm one of those writers who, even though I try to write a different story, that's still the story that ends up on the page. And how empowering that is. So again, the metaphor that when we can fully embrace who we are as integrated human beings, not denying, aspects of ourselves, how empowering that is. And I think, that's what my hope is, that young people or readers of any age really walk away from this, from the importance of, when we can truly be who we are, that's our superpower. There has never been anyone else in the universe exactly like us, and there never will be again. So how can we contribute that to make the world a better place?
So powerful. So, okay, here we are with a couple of pages. Gosh, bringing, like you said, writing the script and then sort of seeing it come to life. But maybe you can walk us through the process, even with this first page here that I have up on the screen, and then we can move to the other couple of pages.
Sure, I'd love to. This was so much fun. So, as I'm writing this novel, and I'm like, how can I make this as visual as possible? I think part of the boom that's coming about with graphic novels is because, we're such a visual culture now. So writing a graphic novel, then the challenge for me as a writer is, how can I make this as visual as possible? I think, I've never been involved in a movie, but, from what I hear from movie writers, same thing, how to make it visual as possible. So if we have Jake, this is through a sort of dark moment that he's going through, where he needs to make a decision about who he is and where his life is going. So, he's, sort of, falls back on his bed, and he's staring up at the ceiling. Okay, he's just staring up at the ceiling. That's kind of a boring image. So how can I make this more exciting? Well, he wants to leave his hometown. He wants to, see the ocean. He wants to get out of his confinement there. What if he's, put a map of the world on his ceiling that he can look at and dream at? Because a large part of his story is, he has these dreams about the ocean. So he's dreaming about this. And then that gives Julie something to work with. And then she captures that so beautifully in that image. And then, that he's always wondered about, what are these strange markings that he has on his arms. So now he's looking at those. And then, his disappointment that, in that shot with the chair, where again, one of the things that DC told us is, if you can give the artist, words that describe what the character is feeling in any given moment, or the characters. And so I can't remember what it was for the image with the chair, but some sort of disappointment, a loss of hope. And then so Julie has those words to play with. So then they come up with, well, Jake is slumped over, the body language. And, even with the image there in the mirror, where he's shedding that, that outer skin, shedding the covering, where he's always wearing long sleeve. He's always covering up. He has the shame about those markings. So now he's like uncovering the shame and looking at who he is. And then, some cute little scene there with the fish that, again, showing his vulnerability, and, keeping the story fun.
Mm.
Wait a minute, what's this floating fish that's staring down at him? So having that mascot in there of that fish, to, keep the story, how can the reader constantly be engaged in these different levels? That this is a fun, let's remember, this is a fun superhero story, and at the same time dealing with serious
Mm.
issues. So to be
Hmm.
able to combine all that, and then with with what Julie did there in terms of the black swirl there, the darkness that he's feeling at that moment.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Um, these pages, Alex, are pretty extraordinary, I think. Maybe you can kind of chat us through this process.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, DC was fully on board in terms of diversity, this being, a gay character, dealing with his sexuality. And my editor, Sarah Miller, she was all like, feel free, really show the romantic longing and intimacy between these boys. And so what I tried to capture as a writer in the writing, and so for each panel, I would give Julie a description of what's happening in the panel, who's looking, who's talking to who, what is each of them feeling, try to give her some actions. So in the very first panel there, you see, okay, Jake is unbuttoning his shirt. Second panel, Kenny is looking up at him from the pool. So just giving Julie these sort of suggestions so that she has something, they have something to play with. And then, so Sarah, she was like, I want to see smooching this. I want to see the boys, really, getting physical with each other. Whether it's holding each other, touching each other. So in the second page of panels there, you have Kenny's giving Jake a little foot massage there. And one of the things I learned long ago in my writing, whenever you have characters making physical contact, boy, that lights up something in our brains, because how powerful that is in real life, whether we're, shaking hands or, touching someone on the shoulder, whatever it is, how much physical contact can be stimulating for us as a reader, because it's giving us that sensory sense. And then in the final panels there, where the two boys are reaching out to each other, touching each other, and then kissing. And so, as I said, Sarah and DC, they were like, "Go for it," and it was great. Julie, they went for it, and so this is what we have.
Extraordinary, and also very careful. The dialogue's very carefully selected. It both feels like this is teenagers talking to each other, but it's also very sensitive in the way that they are, and intensifies, like, does that feel okay? Kind of asking permission for that very intimate kind of touching of a very sort of soft, usually untouched part of our body, our toes and our feet.
Yeah, so that's where, because it is young adult literature, it not only makes, the aim is not only to tell a good story, but at the same time to give a representation for young people about how they might approach each other. Where as a boy might feel so awkward about, well, what would I say? What would I do if I like this other boy? How would I communicate that? Then what I've learned from my other books, when I first started hearing from teenagers that my characters were their role models, like, no, these are just characters. And then I started realizing that no, that's okay. That it's okay to create role models for young people to learn how to navigate their lives.
Yeah, beautiful, absolutely beautiful, extraordinary. Author Alex Sanchez, gosh, you are incredible. The work that you do is incredible. I feel very honored to have had this moment with you, and thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it tremendously. And thanks for these beautiful panels that you put together.